much for joining me today. It's an honor to talk to you about your role founding Excel Charter Academy. Excel was one of Grand Valley State University's first 3 schools that it authorized. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Maybe you could start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you were doing at the time that Excel was coming together.
Well, I'm an educator, so my area of focus is elementary education. So I taught at Grand Rapids Public Schools, and also I was a founder of Potter's House, which is a Christ-centered urban school for kids that don't have access to private education. So that's pretty much what I've done my whole life, is just focus on urban issues and urban schools.
And you were in that capacity in 1995 when Excel was coming together.
Right. I was doing both things at that year. I was working half-time at GRPS, and I was also the administrator of the Potter's House.
Okay. So how did you first meet up with the founding team for Excel?
I met up with the founding team because J.C. Huizinga was a supporter of Potter's House. He still is, and so I knew him quite well. And then Mark DeHaan was my director of development. We need to raise scholarship funds every year. And he had just left a year before. And then he and J.C. mentioned to me that they'd come up with this plan to investigate doing a charter school, and asked if I would come to a meeting or two. So I did.
So when you first heard the idea, what were some of the thoughts that you had?
Well, I don't think the whole concept of charter schools was at first readily clear, because I'd never heard of them before, or exactly how they fit in with the public system. But my thoughts were positive from the beginning, because living in an under-resourced neighborhood, which I have for the last 44 years, and focusing on cities, one of the things that came up over and over and over again is the number of parents that felt so trapped with having no choice in the education of their child, and sending their kids to schools that they weren't comfortable with, but yet couldn't afford to move and couldn't do anything about it. And so the options of giving parents more choice has always been very, very positive for me.
Yep, and that was a pretty big risk that you took and the founding team took with one of the first schools.
Yeah, it was a very big risk for me, especially maybe working in a public school at the time, because it was controversial. And I think the unions came out against the concept of charter schools. And so to be on the board of a charter school and working in a public school brought up some interesting conversations.
So tell us a little bit about your board experience. You've been on the board since the beginning. So what was that first year like for you?
The first year, well, that's 25 years ago. So there are about 4 or 5 of us, and Andy DeVries was one of the people. And it was, I think, a lot of learning, really, trying to understand how this all worked, how the funding model worked, what the role of the board was supposed to be, the relationship between the board and the staff, and a lot of things. So it was a lot of learning, but it was also very exciting, because you know, it hadn't been done before, and so it was revolutionary in a way, cutting edge. And yet you also had or maybe along the same lines, you had the opportunity to start from scratch in a way, in terms of curriculum and, in our case, the character formation that we wanted to be a strong component of the school. And yeah, so it was very exciting from a curricular point of view, and also very exciting from an administrative point of view, conceptually.
So having experience in public, private, and now in charter, what were some of the differences that you noticed between the different systems?
Over the years, or in that first year?
Over the years.
I think one of the things over the years has been the concept of empowering parents to make choices, and then when parents are empowered, how their buy-in grows. And by that I mean, every year we give a survey to the parents and to the students, And each year it was overwhelmingly positive about how the parents felt about the school and how the students felt about the school. So for me, right from the beginning, it was like, okay, this is exactly what these parents want. This is what the students want. It's working. The teachers like it. The students like it. The parents like it. There's buy-in by everybody. And there's this community and there's this partnership. And it's working. So I think that was one of the things that, because those same parents, a few years before, many of them felt like they didn't have choice. Many of them were very unhappy with their schooling situations. And so just going from, a sense of dissatisfaction to beyond satisfaction was very fulfilling and very impressive.
And over the years, there must have been a lot of political pushback as well.
Yeah.
Maybe could you talk a little bit about that in the founding years? What sort of headwinds did you face?
Well, a lot of times projects or political things can just be labeled with a word. It's usually a disparaging word, and then it's not really necessarily deeply thought out, but it's just like, okay, those, a word might be, or a phrase that's going to destroy urban schools, or it'll skim the cream of the crop off our schools, or our schools will lose funding, or there are a lot of fearful types of things were talked about. So I think that then polarizes people, and so you're in one camp and in another camp, maybe based on knowledge and maybe not. So for me, being on the board and still being a teacher, at times the secretary of Excel would call my school and say, please remind John that there's a board meeting tonight. And I'm like, could you not do that, please? It's like, because in those early times, even with homeschooling, when homeschooling first became popular, there was a big pushback in the school systems, like parents aren't capable of doing that, it's not a wise thing, it's not a healthy thing. But as time went on, it becomes acceptable. And I expected the same thing would happen with charter schools, that at first there'd be a pushback, a fear of the unknown, and then as they prove themselves that things would change. And I think that's pretty much the way it has. One thing that was very helpful for Excel and for a lot of the first NHA schools is that they were administrated by former public school administrators. Okay. And so I thought that really helped, to have Bill Canuster as the first principal of Excel, someone that was so highly respected in Grand Rapids Public Schools, and kind of taking that on. And some of the other teachers, some of the other principals, Mr. Kirkwood, Mr. Chan, highly respected principals in the public school system that then did the charter. And so I think the respect from what they had done before came right over to what they were doing in charter schools.
Really early on, pretty much as soon as the law passed, it was challenged about its constitutionality. And I remember funding was held up for a little while. As a board member, were you ever concerned that the law would be ruled unconstitutional and the school would have to close?
I wasn't very concerned.
Okay.
But then I had not invested my fortune into it, you know.
Yeah.
But I did have a thought in the back of my mind that this was going to be an ongoing battle, and it might swing both ways. I'm actually surprised that there weren't any bigger fallbacks than we've seen. You know, that it's basically stayed intact, has moved forward. So, you know, it wouldn't have surprised me just because it was such a volatile conversation at the time.
And over the years, on the political side, you've seen a lot of people in public office who've supported or opposed and have come through Excel to check things out. Any memorable experiences within that of people who might have come around to the charter way of thinking? Or
I think that, nothing's coming to my mind as far as that goes, but I think that the conversation in general has come around to much more positive about charter schools. I can't think of any person that came and, you know, had a revolutionary experience. But I do know that as I followed it all across the nation, that it's been people on both sides of the aisle, depending on what your state is and where you lean and where states tend to lean. but it's not necessarily Democrat or Republican, but on both sides there's been many people that have been very favorable about charter schools. And I think one of the things that's very significant is wherever people fall on it, I have noticed that when they're in Washington, in an office or whatever, that they make a choice for where their children go to school.
Yeah.
And so whatever they might say politically, everyone seems to feel that when it comes to their own child, they want to be the person making the choice and making sure that they're going to a school that's safe and strong academically and strong in character formation. Yeah. So,
what are some of your most rewarding experiences serving on a charter school board?
Well, I think that the experience of being on the board in and of itself was rewarding because we have a great board, both at Excel that I was on for decades and now Grand River Prep. So that's been rewarding. I think another great reward has been the many parents that I've talked to that have just been so happy with the experience, and the many teachers that have been so happy with the experience. So, and then I guess to me, to see the amount of students who are graduating successfully. So one of the greatest joys for me is we've talked a lot about Excel, but Excel birthed Grand River Prep. And Grand River Prep, I'd say, is about 70% minority. And when just 10 years ago, there was about a 47% graduation rate. And our students at Grand River Prep have some of the highest scores in the state of Michigan. The graduation rate is phenomenal, and most are going on to college. And you know, they've raised like millions and millions and millions of dollars of scholarship support. So for me, somebody who lives by choice in under-resourced neighborhoods and seeing kids that could have been in situations where they would have had challenging times, either because of the environment or because of the academic rigor, just being empowered to have a whole different future. To me, that is what's so exciting. And knowing that there's still millions of kids all across the country that are in failing schools, I feel like what's happening at Grand River Prep, what's happening at Excel, is part of the answer to some huge problems that we have in education.
And how many classes have graduated from Grand River Prep right now?
I don't know. 10 maybe?
I think that's around right. So it's a lot of diplomas and it's a lot of hands to shake across stage.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of graduations. Yeah.
Yep. And both schools, Excel and Grand River Prep, really were founding schools of networks that have gone all across the country.
And NHA.
Yep. So that must be rewarding to have seen what started here in Grand Rapids blossom out.
Yeah, I do brag about it every now and then. You know, it's a good feeling to be part of the forming committee of Excel and then know that we have like, what is it, 80 schools or something like that across the country. And so you're part of something that is just so much bigger than even what you thought you were part of. Because you're actually part of, you know, 50,000 kids getting a different type of education. That was what, you know, their parents wanted. And
so what were some experiences that you found to be the most challenging?
Well, for me personally, it's navigate, for people to understand. I feel committed to urban kids, giving them good education wherever that was found. And so there's great public schools, there's great private schools, there's great charter schools. Sometimes the challenge is that people want you to be in one box or the other. And any school that's doing a great job excites me. So that's one of the challenges, just navigating conversations earlier on. I think it's much, much easier now. And I would also say is like, if I could back up just a little bit, is like, I think that the whole introduction of competition into the national conversation of education has really caused people to sharpen their game. You know, I've seen so many new types of school starts, new types of public schools. You know, there's the museum schools, and There's aviation. You know, there's so many new types of schools. I think it's really been good, and that to me has been exciting. That it seems like in the beginning we said that it would raise the water level for everybody, and I believe it's starting to do that. And so I'm very excited about that. And what was the rest of what was the question that I
challenges,
was really
some challenges that you may have had over the years.
Well, I think that you know, if it was easy, everyone would do it. Everyone would be doing it. And Excel has just, from the very beginning, been this phenomenal school with great scores and performance and great ethos and everything else. And so is Grand River Prep. But as you expand nationally, not every school is as successful as Excel or GRP at the beginning. You know, it's hard a lot of times, you know, to go into an area and where there's just been generations of failure in education and to turn things around. So I visited one of our schools in a very at-risk city out east, and wow, they had just taken 300 kids from failing schools, and voila, you know, now we're a charter school. Then the next year added 200 more. It's like those are really challenging situations, and it hasn't been overnight, but I've seen over a period of time really remarkable success. But I think that's the challenge.
Sure.
There's no real easy answers for a lot of the educational issues that we're dealing with. You know, they're challenging. Let's put it that way. It's not really making it very clear, but let's just say urban education in failing areas is very challenging.
It's complex.
And when you end up with, it takes a lot. But I've been encouraged, but it's also the challenge.
Sure. So we've spent a lot of time looking back on the last 25 years. If you were to look forward into the next 25 years of charters and choice, what would you be seeing in your crystal ball right now?
Well, I felt like in the beginning, when the charter schools first started, that there was basically private schools and public schools, that nobody really started schools other than a group of churches, a parish, or a diocese, I mean, or a city. And so that's quite limiting, and sometimes change is slow in both of those scenarios.
Sure.
And so one of the things that I was hoping that I would see in the beginning, that when you began to try new things like charter schools, that maybe it would open the door for all kinds of different types of schools starting that might, you know, some might last, some might not last, but just bring in that whole, I don't know if I want to say free enterprise, but just that whole more competitive, entrepreneurial kind of approach, that there might be just a lot more choices for parents. And so if I look into the future, that's what I would hope. I would hope that that there could be more freedom, you know, in the country that's led the world in democracy and in freedom, certainly freedom of personal expression, that there could be more freedom in the whole educational realm, and that we would actually be able to try new types of schools that maybe weren't after the model of the industrial age, you know, 100 years ago, but we could try to experiment with some new ways of doing school that might maybe bring us to a more competitive edge as a country, and just to foster that creative edge instead of asking what were schools like 100 years ago. How can we envision what schools of the future could be like, and what their curriculum could be like, and what their student makeup could be like, and so I think there's schools like that are starting all over the country, And I think that that would be my hope for the future, that, that the whole charter movement would continue to grow and expand. And in doing that, it would build confidence with the population in general that there are other ways of doing schooling, and that charter schools are trustworthy, and we can stop the conversation of, you know, the negative side. And I guess then maybe people will be comfortable trying other things as well, and funding other things as well. But I think the goal would be that I'm hoping that every family in this country would feel comfortable with where they send their child for 6 to 7 hours a day, and that school would be a place that would nourish and help the child to flourish. And maybe a family might send their children to 3 or 4 different schools, because maybe one wants to go to a school that's based on science, some kind of innovative science school, or one might want to go to a more traditional classical school, or one might want to go to a Christ-centered school. But whatever's going to be best meet the needs of that child, my dream would be that this movement would continue to give people choice, empower parents to have the schools that are best for their kids, and eventually best for moving our country forward.
John, last question. You've founded 2 schools, 2 charters over the last 25 years, and a lot of ups and a lot of downs. Would you do it again?
Well, I feel that my role has been very minuscule, you know, as far as that goes. So to me, it's all been all positive. So I've learned so much, and even going to the board meetings, I write notes and come back to my own job at Potter's House and say, maybe we should try this, maybe we should go in this direction. So it's been it's been a thing of learning and growth for me. It's been there hasn't been any downsides. So yeah, I would do it. I would do it again. The people you'd have to ask, I guess, would be JC or, you know, who's ever running the charter school. So
great. Well, John, thank you for your time today, and thank you for your board service too.
You're welcome.
Great. Thanks.